My name is Sarah, and I'm 28 years old. For most of my life, I believed that staying quiet and humble was the right way to help others. I donated anonymously, volunteered without recognition, and supported my community from the shadows while my family treated me like their biggest disappointment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I thought keeping my good deeds private was noble until the day my cousin's wedding seating chart labeled me as one of the disappointments at table 12. But when Father Martinez asked to meet the mysterious church benefactor who had been funding the youth program for 3 years, everything changed in ways I never could have imagined. Growing up in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, I was always the quiet observer in a family full of loud personalities. My mother, Carol, worked as a real estate agent and had a voice that could carry across 3 rooms when she got excited about a sale. My father, David, managed a small construction company and believed that success should be visible and measurable, like the houses he helped build. Then there was my older sister, Jessica, who seemed to excel at everything she touched, from cheerleading in high school to landing a prestigious marketing job in downtown Denver right after college. Our family gatherings were like performances where everyone had a role to play except me. Jessica would arrive with stories about her latest promotion, her expensive purchases, and her social media-worthy weekend adventures. My parents would beam with pride as she showed off her new designer handbag or talked about the important clients she was meeting. Carol would immediately start calling relatives to share Jessica's latest achievements, and David would nod approvingly while discussing how success requires ambition and visibility. I learned early that my contributions didn't fit their definition of achievement. While Jessica was winning Homecoming Queen and getting featured in the local newspaper for her volunteer work with the popular kids' charity events, I was tutoring struggling students after school for free and helping elderly neighbors with their grocery shopping. These activities never made it into family dinner conversations because they weren't flashy enough to warrant discussion. My parents weren't cruel or intentionally dismissive, but their attention naturally gravitated toward accomplishments they could understand and share with others. When Jessica got a scholarship to Colorado State University, we had a celebration dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. When I quietly earned academic honors and got into the University of Colorado with partial financial aid, the acknowledgement was a brief, "That's nice, honey," before the conversation shifted to Jessica's sorority rush plans. The pattern continued through college and into my adult life. I studied social work because I genuinely wanted to help people, not because it would lead to impressive salary figures or prestigious job titles. After graduation, I took a position at a nonprofit organization that provided services to homeless families, work that was meaningful to me, but didn't generate the kind of success stories my family could easily brag about to their friends. Jessica, meanwhile, climbed the corporate ladder with remarkable speed, earning promotions and salary increases that became regular topics of family pride. During holiday gatherings, she would casually mention her vacation plans to Europe or her consideration of buying a downtown condo, while I shared updates about the families we had helped find stable housing or the children who had improved in our after-school programs. The difference in response was always stark. Jessica's plans received enthusiastic questions and advice, while my work updates were met with polite nods before someone changed the subject. I began to understand that in my family's worldview, there were 2 types of success: the kind that was visible and impressive to others, and the kind that was invisible and therefore irrelevant. My choice to work in social services, to live modestly, and to find fulfillment in helping others rather than accumulating wealth or status symbols placed me firmly in the second category. I wasn't exactly disapproved of, but I wasn't celebrated either. I had become background noise in my own family story. The financial aspect of my life was something I kept entirely private, not out of secrecy, but because it never occurred to me that it was worth mentioning. My grandmother, Patricia Hartwell, had passed away when I was 22 and left me a substantial inheritance that included stocks, bonds, and a trust fund that generated steady income. The amount was significant enough that, combined with my nonprofit salary, I lived comfortably while having considerable resources left over for other purposes. Rather than using this money for luxury purchases or lifestyle upgrades that might impress my family, I found deep satisfaction in using it to support causes I cared about. I had grown up attending St. Michael's Catholic Church with my family, and even after my parents became less regular attendees, I continued going every Sunday. I loved the sense of community there and was particularly moved by Father Martinez's work with at-risk youth in our area. The church's youth program was chronically underfunded, operating on a shoestring budget that barely covered basic supplies for their after-school activities and summer camps. These programs served children from low-income families in our neighborhood, providing them with safe spaces, homework help, meals, and mentorship that many couldn't access elsewhere. I watched Father Martinez stretch every dollar and apply for grants that rarely materialized, and I knew I could help in a way that would make a real difference. I started making anonymous donations to the youth program 3 years ago, beginning with a modest contribution that allowed them to purchase new sports equipment and art supplies. When I saw how much joy and engagement these simple additions brought to the children, I increased my giving substantially. Over the next 3 years, my donations funded everything from summer camp scholarships to a complete renovation of their meeting space, new computers for homework assistance, and even a van that allowed them to take educational field trips. The transformation of the program was remarkable. What had once been a struggling initiative serving maybe 15 children became a thriving center that supported over 60 kids regularly, with waiting lists for their summer programs. Father Martinez would mention during Sunday services how grateful he was for the generous benefactor who had made this growth possible, but I never identified myself. I preferred knowing that the children were being served well, regardless of whether anyone knew I was involved. My family was completely unaware of any of this. They knew I attended church regularly, which they viewed as another example of my old-fashioned, overly traditional approach to life. When they occasionally asked about my financial situation, I would mention that I was doing fine, that my job paid adequately, and that I was content with my simple lifestyle. They seemed satisfied with these vague responses and never pressed for details about my grandmother's inheritance or how I spent my discretionary income. This created a strange dynamic where I was simultaneously one of the most financially secure people in our extended family and the one they worried about most. My cousins were all establishing themselves in careers that impressed our relatives, even if some of them were struggling with student loans or credit card debt behind the scenes. Because my success wasn't visible in traditional ways, I was often treated like someone who needed guidance or encouragement to get my life on track. Family gatherings became exercises in patience as relatives offered unsolicited advice about my career choices, my single status, and my general life direction. Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, was particularly fond of suggesting that I should consider going back to school for business or marketing, so I could earn more money and maybe afford a nicer apartment. Uncle Tom would regularly ask if I needed help with my resume, or if I wanted him to introduce me to someone who might offer me a better job opportunity. These conversations were well-intentioned but consistently reinforced the message that my current life was somehow insufficient or concerning to others. I learned to smile and thank them for their concern, while internally feeling frustrated that my contentment and purposeful choices were interpreted as signs of failure or lack of ambition. The irony was that I was probably happier and more financially secure than most of them, but because my happiness and security didn't look like theirs, it didn't register as valid. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The most painful part was watching my parents' reactions during these family discussions. Rather than defending my choices or pointing out my positive qualities, they would nod along with the concerned relatives and sometimes add their own gentle suggestions about how I might improve my situation. I understood they thought they were being helpful, but it reinforced my growing sense that I was viewed as the family member who hadn't quite figured out how to be successful. This perception extended beyond immediate family to our broader social circle and extended relatives. During community events or church gatherings where we would run into family friends, the conversations followed predictable patterns. People would ask about Jessica's latest achievements, express admiration for her career progress, and then turn to me with expressions of polite concern. They would ask how my job was going in tones that suggested they expected to hear about struggles or disappointments. And when I responded positively about my work, they would nod encouragingly as if I were making the best of a difficult situation. I began to realize that I had been categorized in people's minds as someone who needed encouragement rather than someone whose accomplishments deserved recognition. This wasn't malicious, but it was limiting and hurtful in ways that were difficult to articulate. I was proud of my work, satisfied with my life choices, and secretly doing more to help my community than anyone knew. Yet I was consistently treated as though I was falling short of expectations. The situation became more pronounced as my cousins began reaching major life milestones. My cousin Michael, who was 2 years younger than me, got engaged to his college girlfriend and announced their plans for an elaborate wedding. My cousin Jennifer, who was my age, received a promotion to management at her accounting firm. My cousin Robert bought his first house with his wife. Each of these events was celebrated extensively by our family, with phone calls circulating among relatives to share the good news and plan celebrations. Meanwhile, my achievements at work, my volunteer activities, and my personal growth remained largely unnoticed because they didn't fit into categories that my family understood as newsworthy. When I was recognized by the city council for my nonprofit's work in reducing family homelessness, I mentioned it briefly during a family dinner. The response was a few polite congratulations before the conversation shifted to Jessica's new job responsibilities. When I completed a marathon to raise money for children's cancer research, finishing in an impressive time that I had trained months to achieve, my family's reaction was mild interest, followed by concerns about whether all that running was hard, on my knees. These experiences taught me that recognition and validation from my family would likely never come, regardless of what I accomplished. Their definition of success was fixed around traditional markers like salary, job titles, marriage, homeownership, and social status. My path toward fulfillment through service, community involvement, and purposeful giving simply didn't register on their radar as achievement worth celebrating. I made peace with this reality by finding validation elsewhere. My co-workers appreciated my dedication and creativity in serving our clients. The families I worked with expressed genuine gratitude for the support they received. Father Martinez would regularly mention how much the youth program meant to the community, unknowingly thanking me every Sunday for contributions he couldn't attribute to anyone specific. These sources of recognition sustained me and reinforced that my choices were valuable, even if my family couldn't see it. But there was still a part of me that longed for my family to understand and appreciate who I was, rather than focusing on who they thought I should become. I wanted them to see that my quiet approach to helping others was deliberate and meaningful, not a sign of lack of ambition or direction. I wanted them to recognize that contentment and purpose could be more valuable than impressive job titles or expensive possessions. This tension between my inner sense of purpose and my family's perception of me created an emotional distance that grew wider over time. I continued attending family gatherings and maintaining relationships, but I felt increasingly like an outsider looking in on a group of people who shared values and priorities that were fundamentally different from mine. I loved them, but I didn't feel truly known or understood by them. The divide became particularly evident during discussions about money and lifestyle choices. My family members would often complain about financial pressures, student loan payments, mortgage stress, and the costs of maintaining their desired standard of living. I would listen sympathetically while knowing that I could easily help with many of their concerns if they asked. but they never did because they assumed I was in a similar or worse financial position. Jessica would mention stress about her rent payments for her expensive downtown apartment, and my parents would worry aloud about her finances while never considering that I might be in a position to offer assistance. Uncle Tom would discuss his concerns about paying for his daughter's college tuition, never imagining that his quiet niece who worked at a nonprofit might have resources that could help. These conversations highlighted how completely they misunderstood my actual circumstances. I never corrected these misperceptions because doing so would have required explaining my inheritance and my giving habits. Conversations I wasn't prepared to have. I knew that revealing my financial situation would change how they saw me, but I wasn't sure it would change how they valued me. I suspected they might be impressed by the money, but still view my choice to work in social services and live modestly as puzzling or wasteful. The anonymity of my charitable giving became increasingly important to me as a way to maintain the integrity of my motivations. I never wanted to help others because it would earn recognition or gratitude, but because it was the right thing to do and brought me genuine satisfaction. Keeping my contributions private ensured that my reasons remained pure and that the focus stayed on the people being helped rather than on me as the helper. This philosophy extended to my relationship with the church community. I attended services regularly, participated in volunteer activities, and built genuine friendships with other parishioners, but always as Sarah the social worker, not Sarah the major donor. People knew me as someone who cared about the youth, program and supported Father Martinez's work through volunteer hours and small public contributions, but they had no idea about the extent of my financial involvement. Father Martinez and I had developed a warm friendship based on our shared commitment to serving others. He would often ask for my input on program decisions because he valued my professional experience working with at-risk families. I would offer suggestions and insights while being careful not to push too hard for changes that I was secretly funding. These conversations required a delicate balance between being helpful and maintaining my anonymity as the benefactor. The youth program had become like my own project in many ways, though no one knew it. I would drive by the church during program hours and feel deep satisfaction watching children arrive with excitement, knowing that my contributions had made their activities possible. I would hear stories from Father Martinez about kids who were improving in school because of the homework help, or teenagers who were avoiding dangerous situations because they had safe places to spend their time. And I would feel the kind of fulfillment that no job promotion or salary increase could provide. This secret aspect of my life gave me a sense of purpose and identity that was entirely my own, separate from my family's opinions or expectations. While they saw me as someone who was drifting without clear direction, I knew I was making a significant difference in my community in ways that aligned perfectly with my values and priorities. The disconnect between their perception and my reality was substantial, but I had learned to live with it as the price of maintaining my privacy and autonomy. However, this dynamic was about to be challenged in ways I never anticipated. My cousin, Michael's wedding was approaching, and the event would bring together extended family members I rarely saw, creating opportunities for the kinds of conversations and comparisons that I had learned to navigate carefully. What I didn't expect was that this gathering would also create a situation where my two worlds, my private charitable work and my family relationships, would collide in ways that would change everything. The wedding planning had been going on for months, with regular updates shared among family members about venue selections, catering choices, and guest list considerations. Michael and his fiancée, Amanda, had chosen to have their ceremony at St. Michael's Catholic Church, the same church I attended regularly, followed by a reception at a nearby country club. The choice of St. Michael's was meaningful to me because it was my spiritual home, but I was also slightly nervous about the potential for my two worlds to intersect during the event. As the wedding date approached, I found myself looking forward to celebrating Michael's happiness while also feeling apprehensive about the family dynamics that would play out during the gathering. Extended relatives would be present, many of whom I saw only at weddings and funerals, and I knew the conversations would follow familiar patterns about career updates, relationship status, and life achievements. I prepared myself mentally for the usual round of well-meaning but misguided advice about my life choices. What I couldn't have prepared for was the seating chart incident that would expose just how my family really viewed me, or the moment when Father Martinez would unknowingly reveal the truth about my secret contributions to the church. The collision of these two realities would create a situation that would challenge everything I thought I understood about family relationships, personal recognition, and the value of quiet service to others. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March, elegant cream cardstock with gold lettering that announced Michael and Amanda's June celebration. I held it in my hands, admiring the beautiful calligraphy while feeling a familiar mix of excitement and dread about the upcoming family gathering. What I didn't expect was the phone call that would come 3 weeks later, fundamentally changing how I viewed my place in our family hierarchy. Carol called me on a Saturday morning while I was enjoying coffee on my small apartment balcony, watching the spring flowers bloom in the community garden below. Her voice had that particular tone she used when she was trying to be diplomatic about something potentially awkward, a sound I had learned to recognize over the years. "Hi, sweetheart. I hope I'm not calling too early," she began, though it was nearly 10 o'clock. "I wanted to talk to you about Michael's wedding seating arrangements. Amanda's mother called me yesterday with some questions about our family, and we need to sort out a few details." I settled back in my chair, assuming this would be a brief conversation about dietary restrictions or +1 confirmations. Instead, Carol launched into an explanation that would reveal exactly how my extended family had categorized me and my life choices. "The thing is, honey, they're trying to organize the reception tables in a way that makes sense socially and professionally. You know how these things work. They want people to have good conversations and connections." She paused, and I could hear her taking a breath before continuing. "They've got a table for the young professionals, where Jessica will be sitting with some of Michael's friends from his law firm and Amanda's sorority sisters who are all doing well in their careers." I nodded along, though she couldn't see me, wondering where this explanation was heading. "That sounds nice for Jessica. She'll enjoy meeting new people in similar fields." "Exactly. And then they have a table for the married couples, one for Amanda's college friends, and a lovely table near the head table for the grandparents and older relatives." Carol's voice became more hesitant as she continued. "The challenge they're having is figuring out where to put some of the family members who are in transition periods or haven't quite settled into their careers yet." The phrase hit me like cold water. Transition periods. I had been working in my field for 6 years, had received multiple promotions and recognitions, and was considered a senior staff member at my organization. Yet somehow, my career was being characterized as unsettled or transitional. "What do you mean by transition periods?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. Carol's discomfort was audible through the phone. "Well, people who are still figuring things out. Like your cousin Danny, who's been switching between different sales jobs, and Rebecca, who's taking time off from teaching to figure out what she really wants to do. And there's Amanda's brother who just graduated and is living at home while he job hunts." The comparison stung more than I had expected. I was being grouped with people who were genuinely struggling to find direction, as though my established career in social work was equivalent to unemployment or career confusion. "Mom, I'm not in transition. I've been working at the same organization for 6 years. I have a stable career that I love." My voice remained calm, but I felt a familiar frustration building inside me. "Oh, honey, I know you enjoy your work, and that's wonderful. But you have to understand how it looks to other people. Amanda's family is very successful, very established, and they're trying to create an atmosphere where everyone feels comfortable. They thought it might be awkward for you to sit with the young professionals when your job is so different from theirs." Different. Another loaded word that revealed how my family viewed my choices. My work wasn't just different, it was lesser in their minds, something that needed to be handled delicately to avoid embarrassing anyone. "So where exactly am I being seated?" I asked, though I was dreading the answer. Another pause. "Well, they've created what they're calling a mixed table with some of the family members who are..." How did Amanda's mother put it? "Still working on establishing themselves." "It's table 12, towards the back, but still with a lovely view of the dance floor." The euphemisms were becoming more transparent with each explanation. Table 12 was clearly where they were putting the family disappointments, the relatives who couldn't be easily categorized into successful social groupings. I was being seated with the unemployed, the underachievers, and the family members, who made others uncomfortable with their lack of conventional success. "Who else is at table 12?" I asked, morbid curiosity overcoming my better judgment. Carol rattled off a list that confirmed my suspicions. Danny, who had been fired from 3 sales jobs in 2 years. Rebecca, who quit teaching after having a nervous breakdown and was now working part-time at a coffee shop while living with her parents. Amanda's brother Jake, who had graduated college 8 months ago and was still sending out resumes while playing video games in his childhood bedroom. My second cousin Mark, who had dropped out of graduate school and was driving for a ride-sharing service while claiming to be working on a novel that no one had ever seen. "It'll be fun," Carol said with forced enthusiasm. "You'll all have things in common, and maybe you can encourage each other." The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. I was being placed at a table of people who needed encouragement, as though my life was something that required fixing or motivation from others who were equally struggling. The assumption that I belonged with this group revealed how fundamentally my family misunderstood both my circumstances and my choices. "Mom, do you really think I belong at that table?" I asked directly, hoping she might recognize the absurdity of the comparison. "Sweetheart, I think you'll be comfortable there. These are good people who are just finding their way, like you are. And who knows, maybe some of Amanda's relatives will have ideas about opportunities that might interest you." Finding my way. At 28, with the established career, financial security, and a clear sense of purpose, I was still being characterized as someone who was lost and seeking direction. The conversation revealed that despite years of stability and professional growth, my family still viewed me as a project that needed guidance rather than a person who had already found her path. After the call ended, I sat on my balcony for another hour, processing the implications of what I had just learned. Being seated at table 12 wasn't just about wedding logistics. It was about how my entire extended family had categorized my life. They saw me as someone who belonged with the strugglers, the unemployed, and the directionless, despite having no real understanding of my actual circumstances. The irony was overwhelming. While they were seating me with people they perceived as financial burdens or disappointments, I was quietly funding programs that served hundreds of children in our community. While they worried about my career prospects, I was in a position where I could have retired early if I chose to, thanks to wise investments and my grandmother's inheritance. While they saw me as someone who needed encouragement and guidance, I was probably the most financially secure and personally fulfilled person who would be attending the wedding. But the most painful part wasn't the misunderstanding about my circumstances. It was the realization that my family had never bothered to really understand who I was or what mattered to me. They had created a narrative about my life based on surface-level observations and their own limited definitions of success. And they had never shown enough interest in my actual experiences to question whether that narrative was accurate. The weeks leading up to the wedding became a period of internal preparation for what I knew would be a challenging social situation. I practiced responses to the inevitable questions about my career, my relationship status, and my future plans. I prepared myself mentally for conversations with table mates who might assume we were all in similar situations of struggle or confusion. Most importantly, I steeled myself for the family dynamics that would play out in front of Amanda's successful relatives, knowing that I would be representing the disappointing branch of the family tree. The shopping trip for a wedding outfit became an exercise in strategic thinking. I wanted to look appropriate and put together without appearing to be trying too hard or spending money I supposedly didn't have. I settled on a navy blue dress that was elegant but not expensive looking, paired with simple jewelry and shoes I already owned. The goal was to blend in enough that I wouldn't draw attention to my placement at table 12, while still feeling confident about my appearance. Jessica called me the week before the wedding to discuss logistics, and her approach to the conversation revealed how she viewed the seating situation. "I heard you're at table 12 with some of the younger cousins," she said casually. "That should be relaxed and fun. No pressure to make professional small talk or anything like that." The assumption that I would be relieved to avoid professional conversations because I had nothing meaningful to contribute was another small wound in a growing collection. Jessica genuinely seemed to think she was being considerate by framing table 12 as the low-pressure option, not realizing that her words reinforced the message that I was being hidden away from the important guests. "Are you looking forward to it?" I asked, curious about her perspective on the wedding. "Oh, absolutely. Amanda's family is fascinating. Her father owns a chain of restaurants, and her mother is involved in all these charity boards. The people at my table are all really accomplished, so it should be great for networking. You know how these things can lead to interesting opportunities." The contrast was stark. Jessica was anticipating professional networking and stimulating conversations with accomplished people, while I was expected to be grateful for a relaxed table where no one would expect much from me. The wedding was being framed as a potential career opportunity for her and a social consolation prize for me. The night before the wedding, I lay in bed thinking about how different this event could be if my family knew the truth about my involvement with St. Michael's Church. Tomorrow, I would attend a ceremony at a church where I was the anonymous benefactor responsible for transforming their youth ministry. Father Martinez would be officiating, the same priest who regularly thanked the mysterious donor who had made so many positive changes possible. The altar where Michael and Amanda would exchange vows had been partially funded by my contributions to the church's renovation project 2 years earlier. Yet I would be sitting in the back section with the family disappointments, treated as someone who needed to be kept away from the successful relatives to avoid awkward conversations about my unsuccessful life. The disconnect between reality and perception had never felt more surreal. I also found myself thinking about the youth program kids who would be affected if they knew one of their supporters was being treated this way. Many of them came from families where they were underestimated or dismissed, and part of what we tried to teach them was that their worth wasn't determined by other people's limited understanding of their potential. Tomorrow, I would need to practice what we preached and remember that my value wasn't diminished by my family's failure to recognize it. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect June weather, sunny and warm with a gentle breeze that would make the outdoor photos comfortable. I dressed carefully, taking time with my hair and makeup while listening to music that made me feel confident and centered. Looking in the mirror, I saw someone who was put together, professionally successful, and secretly proud of the good work she was doing in the world. I reminded myself to hold on to that self-image regardless of how the day unfolded. The drive to St. Michael's Church felt different than my usual Sunday morning trips. Today, I was arriving as a member of the wedding party rather than a regular parishioner, and I wondered if anyone would notice the irony of my placement among the family disappointments in a church I had helped transform. The parking lot was already filling with elegantly dressed guests, and I recognized several faces from previous family gatherings mixed with unfamiliar people who were presumably Amanda's relatives and friends. Walking into the church, I was struck by how beautiful it looked for the ceremony. The pews were decorated with white ribbons and flowers, and the afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows created a warm, celebratory atmosphere. Many of those windows had been restored with funds from my anonymous donations, and the sound system that would carry the wedding vows clearly to every guest had been upgraded thanks to my contributions. Yet I would be experiencing this ceremony as an outsider, someone whose family had literally seated her in the back with the people they were embarrassed about. I found my assigned pew and settled in, nodding politely to other family members while noting who was seated where. Jessica was near the front with my parents and other prominent family members, her location reflecting her status as the successful daughter. The extended relatives I rarely saw were scattered throughout the middle sections based on their perceived importance and relationship to the bride and groom. I was far enough back that I would need to crane my neck to see the altar. Clearly, a physical representation of my place in the family hierarchy. The ceremony itself was beautiful, with Father Martinez delivering a heartfelt homily about love, commitment, and the importance of supporting each other through life's challenges. As I listened to his familiar voice, I thought about the many Sunday mornings when he had spoken about serving others and making a difference in the community. He had no idea that one of his most significant supporters was sitting in the back section, classified by her own family as someone who hadn't figured out how to make a meaningful contribution to the world. Michael and Amanda looked radiant as they exchanged vows, and I felt genuine happiness for them despite the complicated emotions surrounding my presence at their wedding. Love was being celebrated, and that was worth focusing on regardless of family politics or social positioning. I applauded enthusiastically when they were pronounced husband and wife, and I smiled warmly as they processed down the aisle past my distant pew. The transition from ceremony to reception required a short drive to the country club, and I used that time to mentally prepare for the social challenges ahead. Table 12 would be my home for the next several hours, and I would need to navigate conversations with people who had been grouped with me based on our perceived shared status as family disappointments. The goal was to be genuinely kind and supportive to my table mates while maintaining my own sense of dignity and self-worth. The country club was elegant, with a large ballroom decorated in white and gold to match the wedding colors. Round tables surrounded a dance floor, with the head table positioned prominently at the front, where Michael, Amanda, and their wedding party would be seated. I located table 12 near the back corner, far from the head table and close to the service entrance, where catering staff moved in and out with trays and supplies. My table mates were already arriving as I approached, and I recognized the faces Carol had described during our phone conversation. Danny was there in a suit that looked like it had been borrowed, nervously adjusting his tie and checking his phone, constantly. Rebecca looked tired and anxious, picking at her nail polish and glancing around the room as though she was worried about being judged. Amanda's brother Jake appeared to be texting under the table, clearly more interested in his phone than the wedding celebration. "Sarah! Oh my God, it's been forever!" Rebecca stood up to hug me, and I was struck by how much older she looked since the last time I had seen her. The stress of her career change and living situation had taken a visible toll, and I felt genuine sympathy for what she was going through. "It's so good to see you," I replied, meaning it despite the circumstances. "How are you doing?" "Oh, taking it one day at a time," she said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "I heard you're still doing the social work thing. That's so admirable. I wish I had your sense of purpose." The comment was well-intentioned, but it highlighted the assumption that everyone at our table was struggling with direction and purpose. Rebecca genuinely believed we were in similar situations, both trying to figure out what to do with our lives. I smiled and thanked her while inwardly noting how different our circumstances actually were. Danny joined the conversation immediately, launching into complaints about the job market and how difficult it was to find decent sales positions in the current economy. "The thing is, companies don't want to invest in training anymore. They expect you to already know everything, but how are you supposed to learn if no one will give you a chance?" I listened sympathetically while he detailed his recent employment struggles, aware that his frustration was genuine even if his analysis of the situation might be incomplete. Jake contributed occasional comments about his own job search difficulties, describing interviews that hadn't led to offers and networking, events that hadn't produced results. Mark, the aspiring novelist, arrived last and immediately began explaining why he was late, a story involving traffic, parking difficulties, and problems with his car that needed repairs he couldn't afford. His explanation took several minutes and included multiple tangents about the unreliability of his vehicle and the inadequacy of public transportation in our area. As we settled into dinner conversation, I realized that my table mates were all dealing with genuine challenges and insecurities about their futures. They weren't bad people or failures. They were adults navigating difficult transitions and economic pressures that were affecting many people their age. What bothered me wasn't their company, which was actually pleasant once we got past the initial awkwardness, but the assumption that I belonged with them based on equally serious struggles. The dinner conversation flowed more easily than I had expected, with everyone sharing stories about family expectations, career pressures, and the challenge of figuring out adult life in an economy that seemed less forgiving than the one our parents had navigated. I found myself offering encouragement and perspective based on my work experience, while being careful not to sound preachy or superior. "The thing that gets me," Rebecca said during the main course, "is how everyone acts like there's only one way to be successful. Like if you're not making a certain amount of money or working in a prestigious field, you're somehow failing at life." Her comment resonated with me deeply, though for different reasons than she probably intended. "I think people often have very narrow definitions of what success looks like," I agreed. "Sometimes the most meaningful work isn't the most visible or highly paid." "Exactly," Danny said, nodding enthusiastically. "I mean, look at teachers, or social workers, or people who actually help others. They're doing important work, but society doesn't value it the same way as business or law or whatever. The irony of being praised for choosing meaningful work over financial success while secretly having both was not lost on me. My table mates were defending the career path they believed I had chosen out of idealism rather than practical considerations, unaware that I had the luxury of following my passion precisely because I was financially secure. As the evening progressed, I began to appreciate the genuine qualities of the people I was seated with, even while feeling frustrated by the circumstances that had brought us together. Rebecca was thoughtful and introspective, someone who was genuinely trying to figure out how to build a life that aligned with her values. Danny was optimistic and resilient despite his setbacks, maintaining hope that the right opportunity would come along. Jake was actually quite funny once he put his phone away, and Mark had interesting insights about storytelling and human nature, even if his novel remained unfinished. The problem wasn't my table mates. It was the system that had categorized us all as disappointments and hidden us away from the rest of the family celebration. We were having meaningful conversations and supporting each other in ways that were probably more authentic than the networking discussions happening at the professional tables. Yet we had been placed together because we were all perceived as people who hadn't achieved enough to warrant inclusion in the main social circles. During the dancing portion of the evening, I watched Jessica move confidently between different groups of guests, introducing herself to Amanda's successful relatives and collecting business cards from potential professional contacts. She looked completely at home in this environment, comfortable with the assumption that she belonged among the accomplished and influential guests. Meanwhile, most of my table mates remained seated, either because they felt out of place on the dance floor or because they were more comfortable staying within our designated social zone. I danced a few times when invited, but I noticed that we were generally left to ourselves by the rest of the wedding guests, as though the table assignments had created invisible social boundaries that persisted throughout the celebration. The most telling moment came during the bouquet toss, when Amanda gathered all the single women for the traditional ceremony. I joined the group, standing towards the back with Rebecca and a few other cousins, while Jessica positioned herself prominently, in the front row. When Amanda threw the bouquet, it sailed over the eager hands in front and landed directly in my arms, almost as though it had been aimed at me specifically. The applause was polite but brief, and I noticed several family members exchanging glances that seemed to convey surprise or mild concern that the bouquet had gone to someone like me. Jessica laughed and called out, "Maybe this means Sarah will finally find someone," a comment that was probably meant to be supportive but came across as slightly pitying. I held the bouquet and smiled, acutely aware that this moment of traditional wedding luck was being interpreted through the lens of my perceived need for romantic rescue. The assumption seemed to be that catching the bouquet might somehow lead to the relationship that would finally help me get my life on track, rather than simply being a fun wedding tradition. As the evening wound down and guests began saying their goodbyes, I reflected on the strange experience of attending a family wedding, where I had been systematically excluded from the main social dynamics, while secretly being one of the most significant contributors to the church where the ceremony had taken place. The disconnect between perception and reality had been on full display throughout the evening, and I was emotionally exhausted from navigating the various layers of irony and misunderstanding. But the most revealing part of the evening was still to come. As guests moved towards the exit and family members gathered for final photos, Father Martinez appeared in the reception area, still wearing his ceremonial vestments from the wedding ceremony. He moved through the crowd, greeting parishioners and guests, accepting compliments on the beautiful ceremony and the lovely state of the church. I was saying goodbye to my table mates when I noticed Father Martinez approaching our area, and I felt a flutter of nervousness about the potential for awkward intersection between my family life and church life. He had never seen me at family events, and I wondered if he would recognize me out of my usual Sunday morning context. "Sarah," he called out warmly as he spotted me. "How wonderful to see you here. I didn't realize you were related to the groom." Several family members turned at the sound of my name, curiosity evident on their faces as they noticed the priest's familiar tone with me. Carol and David looked particularly surprised, clearly wondering how I had developed what appeared to be a personal relationship with the wedding officiant. "Hello, Father Martinez," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual. "Michael is my cousin. It was a beautiful ceremony." "Thank you so much, and please give my regards to your family. It's always such a pleasure to see our parishioners at these celebrations." He paused, looking around at the elegant reception setup. "You know, this whole event reminds me how blessed our parish has been lately. We've been able to do so many wonderful things for our community thanks to the generosity of our benefactors." I felt my heart rate increase as he continued speaking, unaware that he was about to reveal information that would change everything about how this evening had unfolded. "Actually," Father Martinez said, his voice carrying easily to the family members who were now listening with interest, "I've been hoping to meet our most generous benefactor in person. Someone has been supporting our youth program so magnificently for the past 3 years, but they prefer to remain anonymous. I don't even know if it's a man or woman, though I suspect it might be someone from our parish family." The words hung in the air as my family members processed what they were hearing. Jessica's eyebrows raised with curiosity, while my parents exchanged glances that suggested they were trying to understand why the priest was sharing this information with our group. "How generous," Carol said politely. "It's wonderful when people support the church." "Oh, it's been extraordinary," Father Martinez continued, warming to his subject. "This person has single-handedly transformed our youth ministry. We've gone from serving 15 children to over 60, and we've been able to offer programs and opportunities that these kids never could have accessed otherwise. Just last month, we were able to send 12 teenagers to a leadership camp that will change their lives." I stood frozen as he unknowingly detailed the impact of my contributions in front of the very family members, who had spent the evening treating me like a disappointment who needed to be hidden away from successful relatives. The irony was so complete, it felt almost surreal. The generosity has been life-changing, not just for the children we serve, but for our entire parish community, Father Martinez continued. "I wish I could thank this person properly, but they've been so insistent on anonymity. All I know is that they care deeply about helping young people, and they understand the real needs of our community. Jessica looked genuinely interested now. That's amazing. Do you have any idea who it might be? Father Martinez smiled mysteriously. I have my suspicions, but I respect their privacy. What I can tell you is that this person is someone who understands that true generosity doesn't seek recognition. They give because it's the right thing to do, not because they want praise or attention. The description felt like a spotlight shining directly on me, though no one in my family made the connection. They were hearing about someone who embodied exactly the qualities I had been trying to live by, someone whose contributions were making a real difference in ways that mattered, yet they couldn't imagine that person might be standing right next to them. Well, David said, whoever it is certainly sounds like a remarkable person. Indeed, Father Martinez agreed. I often think about how this benefactor probably has no idea how many lives they've touched. The ripple effects of their kindness will continue for generations. As he spoke these words, looking directly at me with the warm smile I knew from Sunday mornings, I realized that the moment of revelation I had been unconsciously preparing for was finally arriving. The collision between my two worlds was about to happen in the most unexpected way possible, and there was no going back to the comfortable anonymity I had maintained for so long. What happened next would challenge everything my family thought they knew about success, generosity, and the quiet power of purposeful living. Father Martinez paused in his conversation with my family, his eyes scanning the small crowd that had gathered around us. The reception was winding down, but several relatives had lingered to hear more about this mysterious benefactor who had apparently transformed the church's youth program. I could feel my heart pounding as I realized what was about to happen, yet I was powerless to stop it without drawing even more attention to myself. You know, Father Martinez continued, his voice filled with genuine warmth and curiosity. I've always wondered if our benefactor might be someone I see regularly at Sunday services. There's something so personal about the way they understand our community's needs. It's not the kind of giving that comes from reading about charity in a magazine. This person really knows what these children require to thrive. Jessica leaned forward with interest, clearly intrigued by the mystery. What kind of things have they funded? It sounds like it must be substantial to make such a difference. Oh, it's been remarkable, Father Martinez replied, his enthusiasm growing as he spoke. 3 years ago, our youth program was barely surviving on a shoestring budget. We had maybe 15 kids showing up irregularly, no proper supplies, and I was spending my own money just to keep snacks available for the children who came hungry after school. My parents nodded politely, though I could tell they were still puzzled about why this conversation was happening with our family group specifically. Carol glanced at me briefly, perhaps wondering if I had somehow prompted this discussion through my regular church attendance, but she clearly wasn't making any deeper connections. Then everything changed, Father Martinez continued. First, we received an anonymous donation that allowed us to purchase new sports equipment, art supplies, and educational materials. The children were so excited to have basketballs that weren't deflated and craft supplies that weren't dried out. But that was just the beginning. He gestured broadly, his hands painting a picture of transformation as he spoke. Within 6 months, we received funding to completely renovate our meeting space. New flooring, fresh paint, proper lighting, comfortable seating areas where the kids could do homework or just relax safely. Then came money for computers, so the children could get help with their schoolwork and learn technology skills their schools couldn't provide. I stood quietly, feeling increasingly exposed as Father Martinez unknowingly detailed my contributions in front of the very people who had spent the evening treating me like a charity case myself. The irony was becoming so pronounced that I wondered if anyone else would notice it. But my family members seemed absorbed in the story without making any personal connections. The most incredible part, Father Martinez said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, was when we received enough funding to hire 2 part-time youth coordinators and a counselor. Suddenly, we weren't just providing activities. We were offering real mentorship and emotional support to children who desperately needed it. Danny, who had been listening from our table nearby, joined the conversation. That's incredible! How much money are we talking about? It must cost a fortune to run a program like that. Father Martinez nodded thoughtfully. Over the 3 years, I would estimate our benefactor has contributed well over $200,000. Maybe closer to $300,000 when you include all the equipment, renovations, staffing, and program costs. It's been the most generous sustained giving our parish has ever received from a single source. The number landed, like a bomb in the middle of our family group, $200,000 to $300,000. I watched the expressions change on my relatives' faces as they processed the magnitude of what they were hearing. Jessica's eyebrows shot up in surprise, while my parents exchanged glances that clearly conveyed their shock at the amount involved. "My goodness," Carol said, her voice slightly breathless. "That's an extraordinary level of generosity. This person must be quite wealthy to give so much to charity." "You know what's even more remarkable?" Father Martinez replied. "I don't think this person considers themselves wealthy at all. Everything about their giving suggests someone who understands what it means to stretch a dollar and make careful choices about spending. They never fund anything flashy or unnecessary. Every contribution addresses a real practical need that directly impacts the children's lives." I felt increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation continued, knowing that each detail Father Martinez shared was painting a clearer picture of exactly the kind of person I was, while my family remained completely oblivious to the connection. They were hearing about someone who embodied values they claimed to respect, someone whose contributions were making a tangible difference in their community, yet they couldn't imagine that person might be the disappointment they had relegated to table 12. "Have you ever gotten any clues about who it might be?" Jessica asked, clearly fascinated by the mystery. Surely someone giving that much money would want some recognition, or at least want to see the impact of their donations. Father Martinez smiled knowingly. "Actually, that's one of the most beautiful aspects of this whole situation. This person has been incredibly thoughtful about remaining anonymous while still staying informed about the program's progress. I get the sense that they do see the impact, perhaps more directly than I realize." He paused, looking around our group with an expression that suggested he was about to share something significant. In fact, I've started to suspect that our benefactor might be someone I interact with regularly, someone who hears my Sunday announcements about the program and sees the children when they come to church events. The timing of donations often correlates with specific needs I've mentioned during services. My mouth went dry as I realized Father Martinez was getting dangerously close to identifying me, even if he didn't realize it yet. The conversation had taken on a momentum of its own, and I could see that several family members were now paying very close attention, perhaps hoping to solve the mystery themselves. "That would make sense," David said thoughtfully. "Someone who attends regularly would understand the community's needs better than an outsider." "Exactly," Father Martinez agreed. "And there's something else that makes me think this person is part of our parish family. The donations always come with notes that show real understanding of the individual children we serve. Not just general support for youth programs, but specific funding for things like summer camp scholarships for kids whose parents work multiple jobs, or winter coats for children who don't have adequate clothing." Rebecca, who had been listening quietly, spoke up with genuine emotion in her voice. "That's beautiful. It sounds like this person really cares about these kids as individuals, not just as a general cause." "That's exactly right," Father Martinez replied, his voice filled with warmth. "And that level of personal investment makes me believe this benefactor has spent time with these children, maybe volunteers with our programs, or at least attends events where they interact with our youth ministry families." I felt trapped as the circle of possibility narrowed around me. Father Martinez was systematically eliminating the likelihood that the benefactor was a stranger or a distant supporter, while simultaneously describing someone whose involvement and understanding perfectly matched my own experience with the program. "Well," Carol said with a slight laugh, "I hope you figure out who it is someday. It sounds like this person deserves proper recognition for what they've accomplished." "Actually," Father Martinez said, and I felt my stomach drop as I sensed what was coming next. I was hoping that tonight might provide some answers. Wedding receptions are wonderful opportunities to meet parishioners in different social contexts, and I thought our benefactor might be among the guests. He looked around our group again, his gaze lingering on each face as though he was studying us for clues. "In fact, I have a theory that our generous friend might be someone who's here tonight. Someone who's been modestly avoiding acknowledgement while quietly transforming lives in our community." The silence that followed felt charged with possibility and tension. I could sense my family members looking around, perhaps wondering if they might recognize signs of exceptional generosity in someone they knew, while remaining completely blind to the truth standing directly in front of them. Jessica broke the silence with curiosity evident in her voice. "Do you really think they're here tonight? That would be such a coincidence." "Not such a coincidence, actually," Father Martinez replied. "Michael's family has been part of our parish for years, and many of tonight's guests are people I recognize from Sunday services. Our benefactor has shown such detailed knowledge of our community that I'm quite confident there's someone I see regularly." He paused again, and I could see him making mental calculations as he spoke. "In fact, the more I think about it, the more certain I become that our mysterious supporter is probably someone I've spoken with many times, someone who's heard me talk about the challenges we face and the dreams we have for expanding our ministry." I realized with growing alarm that Father Martinez was working through a logical process that would inevitably lead him to the truth. He knew the benefactor was someone with detailed knowledge of the program, someone who attended church regularly, someone who understood the specific needs of the children served, and someone who had the financial resources to make substantial, ongoing contributions. "Father Martinez," I said quietly, hoping to redirect the conversation before it went any further. "It sounds like whoever this person is, they value their privacy. Maybe we should respect that." He turned to me with the warm smile I knew so well from our Sunday morning interactions, and I saw recognition beginning to dawn in his eyes. "Sarah, you're absolutely right about respecting privacy. But you know, sometimes people maintain anonymity not because they want to avoid recognition forever, but because they're humble about their contributions and don't want to make others feel pressured to give more than they can afford." The way he said my name with a particular emphasis and a knowing look made my heart race. I could sense that he was beginning to put pieces together, and I wasn't sure how to respond without either confirming his suspicions or outright lying to him in front of my family. "That's very thoughtful," I replied carefully, "but some people might have other reasons for preferring anonymity." "Of course," Father Martinez agreed, but his tone suggested he was processing information even as he spoke. "Though I have to say, Sarah, you've always shown such insight into the needs of our youth program. Whenever I mention challenges we're facing, you ask such thoughtful questions about how we might address them." I felt my face growing warm as he continued speaking, clearly working through memories of our conversations in a new light. My family members were listening with polite interest, still not making any connections, but I could see that Father Martinez was rapidly approaching a conclusion that would change everything. "Actually," he said, his voice taking on a tone of growing realization, "now that I think about it, many of our most significant donations have come shortly after Sunday services, where you and I have discussed specific needs in the program. The timing has been remarkably consistent." Jessica looked between Father Martinez and me with curiosity. "Sarah, do you know something about this mystery donor?" Before I could answer, Father Martinez continued his logical progression. "And Sarah, you work in social services, so you understand exactly the kind of challenges these children face. You've mentioned several times how important it is to provide comprehensive support, not just activities but also counseling, educational, assistance, and basic necessities like food and clothing. The pieces were falling into place in real time, and I could see the exact moment when complete understanding dawned in Father Martinez's eyes. His expression shifted from curiosity to amazement to deep gratitude as he looked at me with new recognition. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion, "is there something you'd like to tell me about our benefactor?" The question hung in the air like a spotlight, and I realized that the moment I had been unconsciously preparing for during 3 years of anonymous giving had finally arrived. There was no graceful way to deflect or redirect the conversation. Father Martinez had worked through the logical connections, and my family was now looking at me with varying degrees of confusion and growing suspicion that something significant was happening. I took a deep breath, feeling simultaneously terrified and relieved that the truth was about to come out. "Father Martinez, I think you've figured out something I was hoping to keep private." "Oh my God," he whispered, his hands covering his mouth as the full realization hit him. "Sarah, it's you. You're our benefactor. You're the person who has been transforming lives in our community for the past 3 years." The words seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet space around us. My family members stared at me with expressions of shock, confusion, and disbelief as they processed what they had just heard. The woman they had seated at table 12 with the disappointments, the daughter they worried about financially, the sister they thought needed career guidance, was apparently the mysterious philanthropist Father Martinez had been praising for the past 20 minutes. "I don't understand," Carol said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, what is he talking about?" Father Martinez answered before I could respond, his voice filled with awe and gratitude. "Your daughter has been the most generous benefactor our parish has ever known. She's the person who has single-handedly transformed our youth ministry, who has provided opportunities and support for hundreds of children in our community." "That's impossible," David said, shaking his head. "Sarah works at a nonprofit. She doesn't have that kind of money." I looked at my father, seeing genuine confusion in his eyes, and realized that this moment required complete honesty about aspects of my life I had kept private for years. "Dad, I do have that kind of money. Grandma Patricia left me a substantial inheritance, and I've been using it to support causes I care about." "But why didn't you tell us?" Jessica asked, her voice containing a mixture of surprise and something that might have been hurt feelings. "Why keep it secret?" The question touched on years of complicated family dynamics and personal choices about privacy and purpose. "Because I wanted my giving to be about helping others, not about impressing anyone or changing how people saw me. I thought if you knew about the inheritance, it would change our relationships in ways I wasn't ready for." Father Martinez was shaking his head in amazement. "Sarah, do you have any idea what you've accomplished? The children in our program, their families, our entire parish community has been transformed by your generosity. You've changed the trajectory of so many young lives." He turned to address my family directly, his voice filled with passion and conviction. "This woman you see here has been an angel in our community. She's funded everything from basic school supplies to life-changing counseling services. She's made it possible for children from the poorest families in our area to attend summer camps, learn computer skills, and receive mentorship that's keeping them off the streets and in school." "I still don't understand," Carol said, looking between Father Martinez and me with bewilderment. "If Sarah has been doing all this, why didn't we know? Why didn't she tell us?" The question struck at the heart of everything that had led to this moment. I looked around at my family members. These people I loved, who had spent the evening treating me like someone they needed to hide from successful relatives. And I realized that explaining my choices required addressing years of accumulated misunderstandings and assumptions. Because, I said quietly, I learned a long time ago that this family measures success by very specific standards, and my choices don't fit those standards. I thought if I told you about the inheritance, you would either judge me for how I chose to use it, or you would start treating me differently in ways that felt uncomfortable. That's not fair, Jessica protested. We would have been proud of you for helping others. Would you? I asked directly. Because until 5 minutes ago, you all thought I was someone who belonged at table 12 with the family disappointments. You spent tonight treating me like someone whose life wasn't successful enough to warrant inclusion with the accomplished relatives. The words came out more sharply than I had intended, but they carried years of accumulated frustration and hurt. My family members looked uncomfortable as they processed the implications of what I was saying. The seating arrangements weren't about success, Carol said defensively. They were about creating compatible social groups. Mom, you literally told me I was being seated with people who were still figuring things out and in transition periods. You grouped me with unemployed relatives and people living in their parents' basements because you thought that's where I belonged. Father Martinez looked confused as he followed this exchange. I'm sorry. What seating arrangements? For the reception, I explained. My family seated me at a table in the back with relatives they considered disappointments because they assumed I was struggling financially and professionally. The priest's expression shifted to one of disbelief as he understood what I was describing. You mean to tell me that the person who has been our most generous and impactful community supporter was seated with people considered disappointments? That's exactly what happened, I confirmed. My family had no idea who I really am or what I've been doing with my life because they never bothered to look beyond their assumptions about my career choices and lifestyle. The silence that followed was heavy with implication and uncomfortable realization. My family members were beginning to understand not just that they had been wrong about my circumstances, but that their treatment of me had been based on fundamental misunderstandings of my character and contributions. Sarah, David said slowly, why didn't you ever correct us? If we were wrong about your situation, why didn't you tell us? The question deserved an honest answer, even if it was painful. To articulate. Because I wanted you to value me for who I am, not for what I have. I wanted to be appreciated as your daughter and sister based on my character and choices, not because I could help with your financial problems or impress you with my bank account. But we do value you, Carol insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. Do you? I asked gently. Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you only started paying attention to me tonight when you learned I had money. For years, you've treated my career choice as something to be concerned about, my lifestyle as something that needed improvement, and my presence at family gatherings as something that required management. Father Martinez, who had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding, spoke up with quiet authority. I think what Sarah is describing is not uncommon. Sometimes we fail to see the depth and impact of people's contributions when they don't match our expectations about how success should look. He looked directly at my family members as he continued. Sarah has been making a profound difference in our community precisely because she understood that true generosity doesn't seek recognition. She identified needs that others overlooked and addressed them in ways that prioritized impact over visibility. That takes wisdom, compassion, and yes, significant financial resources that she managed responsibly. I just don't understand why you kept it secret from us, Jessica said, and I could hear genuine hurt in her voice. We're your family. We should have known. Should you? I asked. What would you have done with that information? Would you have celebrated my choice to use an inheritance to help children? Or would you have questioned why I wasn't using it to advance my career or improve my lifestyle in more visible ways? The question hung in the air because we all knew the answer My family's values and priorities had been clearly demonstrated through years of conversations about success, money, and appropriate life choices. Their response to learning about substantial resources would likely have been to suggest better ways to use them, ways that would have advanced my social status or career prospects rather than serving community needs. "We would have been proud," Carol said, but her voice was uncertain. "Would you have been proud? Or would you have been relieved that I finally had resources that could make me successful in ways you understood?" I asked. "Because there's a difference, and I think we all know which one it would have been." Father Martinez stepped forward, his voice filled with gentle conviction. "What I can tell you is that Sarah's contributions have demonstrated exactly the kind of character and values that should make any family proud. She saw children in need and found ways to meet those needs. She identified gaps in community services and filled them. She understood that real success is measured by the positive impact we have on others' lives." He turned to look directly at me, his eyes bright with gratitude and respect. "Sarah, I hope you understand how extraordinary what you've accomplished really is. These aren't just donations you've made. They're investments in human potential that will pay dividends for generations. The children you've supported are going to grow up to make their own positive contributions to the world because you gave them opportunities they never would have had otherwise." The validation from Father Martinez meant more to me than I could easily express, partly because it came from someone who had witnessed the actual impact of my choices, and partly because it represented the recognition I had never expected to receive from anyone who mattered to me. "I know the impact," I said quietly. "I see these kids at church events and community gatherings. I watch them grow and succeed and discover their potential. That's been enough for me." "But it shouldn't have to be enough," Father Martinez replied firmly. "Your family should know what a remarkable person you are. Your community should understand the debt of gratitude we owe you, and you should receive the recognition and appreciation your contributions deserve." I looked around at my family members, seeing a mixture of emotions on their faces that included shock, confusion, guilt, and what might have been the beginning of genuine understanding. The conversation had revealed not just my secret philanthropy, but also the fundamental disconnect between their perceptions and my reality. "I think," I said slowly, "what I've learned tonight is that I've been trying to earn appreciation from people who were never going to give it. At least not for the reasons I hoped they would. I wanted you to see my character and value my choices. But I realize now that your standards for success were never going to include the things that matter most to me." The words felt liberating to say, even though they carried sadness about the relationships I had hoped to have with my family. I had spent years trying to be valued by people whose values didn't align with mine, and tonight had finally made that incompatibility impossible to ignore. "That's not true," David protested. "We do appreciate you. We've just been worried about your future security." "Dad, I am secure. I'm financially stable, professionally fulfilled, and personally satisfied with my life choices. Your worry has been based on assumptions about my circumstances that were never true." "But how were we supposed to know that if you didn't tell us?" Jessica asked, and I could hear frustration creeping into her voice. "You could have asked," I replied simply. "Instead of assuming that my career choice meant I was struggling, you could have asked how I was doing financially. Instead of assuming that my lifestyle meant I was lacking direction, you could have asked what my goals and priorities were. Instead of assuming that my contentment meant I was settling for less than I deserved, you could have asked whether I was happy with my choices." The suggestion seemed to surprise them, as though the idea of directly inquiring about my circumstances had never occurred to them. I realized that our family dynamics had been built on assumptions and interpretations rather than direct communication, and tonight had exposed how problematic that approach had become. Father Martinez, who had been observing this family discussion with the wisdom of someone who had counseled many families through difficult revelations, offered a gentle perspective. Sometimes we make assumptions about people we love because we think we already know them well enough. But people are complex, and their motivations and circumstances can be quite different from what we observe on the surface. He looked at each of my family members as he continued. What I've learned about Sarah through our parish relationship is that she's someone who thinks deeply about how to make a positive difference in the world. She's strategic about her giving, thoughtful about the needs she addresses, and committed to approaches that prioritize impact over recognition. Those are remarkable qualities that would make anyone proud to call her family. "We are proud," Carol said, though her voice suggested she was still processing everything she had learned. "I hope that's true," I replied. "But I think we need to be honest about the fact that your pride tonight is connected to learning that I have money and have been giving it away in impressive amounts. I'm not sure you would have been equally proud if you had learned that I was deeply fulfilled by my work and community involvement without the financial component." The distinction was important because it highlighted the difference between valuing someone's character and values versus being impressed by their resources and their use of those resources. I suspected that my family's newfound appreciation was more about the latter than the former, which felt less meaningful than the recognition I had hoped to receive. "Does it matter why we're proud as long as we are?" Jessica asked. "It matters. To me," I said honestly, "because I want to be valued for who I am, not for what I can afford to give away. The money is just a tool that allows me to act on values and priorities that existed long before Grandma Patricia left me an inheritance." Father Martinez nodded approvingly. "That's exactly right. The generosity Sarah has shown comes from her heart and her character. The financial resources made it possible, but the desire to help others and the wisdom to do it effectively came from who she is as a person." As our conversation continued, I began to feel a sense of clarity about my family relationships that had been building for years, but had never crystallized quite so completely. Tonight had revealed not just their misconceptions about my circumstances, but also the fundamental differences in how we understood success, generosity, and personal fulfillment. "I think," I said carefully, "what I've realized tonight is that we have very different definitions of what makes a life worthwhile. And that's probably okay, but it means that I need to stop expecting appreciation for choices that don't align with your values." "What do you mean?" Carol asked. "I mean that I've been waiting for you all to recognize and celebrate the path I've chosen, but that path doesn't lead to the destinations you think are important. You value career advancement, financial security for personal use, and social recognition. I value service to others, community impact, and personal fulfillment through helping people. Those aren't necessarily compatible goals." The realization felt both painful and freeing. I loved my family, but I was finally accepting that their approval for my life choices might never come, and that was a limitation of their perspective rather than a failure of my decisions. "But we can learn to appreciate different kinds of success," David said hopefully. "Can you?" I asked. "Because until tonight, you seated me with the family disappointments at my cousin's wedding. You spent years offering unsolicited advice about my career and lifestyle based on assumptions. That I was struggling or lacking direction? You worried about my future while never asking what my goals actually were." Father Martinez spoke up with the kind of gentle authority that came from years of counseling families through difficult transitions. "What I hear Sarah saying is that she needs her family to understand and respect her choices, even if those choices don't match your expectations about how success should look." "That's exactly what I'm saying," I confirmed. "I need you to understand that my career in social work is a deliberate choice that brings me fulfillment, not a temporary situation that needs to be improved. I need you to recognize that my lifestyle is intentionally modest because I prefer to use my resources to help others rather than to impress people. And I need you to trust that I'm capable of making good decisions about my own life without constant guidance and concern." The requests felt reasonable to me, but I could see that they challenged some fundamental assumptions my family had been operating under for years. They had positioned themselves as my advisors and supporters, people who needed to help me figure out how to be successful. Accepting that I was already successful in ways they hadn't recognized would require them to reconsider their roles in my life. "We just want what's best for you," Carol said, falling back on the familiar refrain that had justified years of unsolicited advice and concern. "What's best for me is to be trusted to make my own choices and to be appreciated for who I am, rather than coached toward becoming someone you think I should be," I replied. "What's best for me is to have family relationships based on understanding and respect, rather than assumption and correction." The conversation was becoming emotional for all of us, as we grappled with years of accumulated misunderstandings and the revelation that our perspectives on success and fulfillment were more different than anyone had realized. But there was also something hopeful in the honest discussion we were having, a possibility that our relationships could be rebuilt on more solid foundation of truth and mutual respect. Father Martinez, sensing that we needed some time to process these revelations as a family, began to excuse himself from the conversation. "Sarah, I hope you know how grateful I am, not just for your financial support, but for your heart and your commitment to our community. You've been an answer to prayers I didn't even know how to pray." He turned to address my family one final time. "You should all know that you have a remarkable woman in your family. What Sarah has accomplished through her generosity and service represents the very best of what it means to live a meaningful life. I hope you'll take time to truly understand and appreciate the person she is." As Father Martinez walked away, my family and I were left to continue our conversation with a new awareness of how much we had misunderstood about each other and how much work we would need to do to rebuild our relationships on more honest and respectful terms. The revelation at Michael's wedding had changed everything, not just because it exposed my secret philanthropy, but because it forced all of us to confront the gap between perception and reality that had been shaping our family dynamics for years. Moving forward, we would need to learn how to see each other more clearly and appreciate different definitions of success and fulfillment. But for the first time in years, I felt truly hopeful about the possibility of being valued by my family for who I actually was rather than who they thought I should become. And perhaps most importantly, I had learned that I didn't need their approval to know that my choices were worthwhile and my contributions were meaningful. The evening ended with tentative conversations about getting together soon to continue our discussion in a more private setting, with promises to ask better questions and make fewer assumptions, and with a new understanding that family relationships work best when they're built on truth and mutual respect rather than expectations and misunderstandings. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in the space of a single conversation. My secret was out. My family understood my true circumstances, and I had finally received recognition for contributions I had never expected anyone to know about. But most importantly, I had learned to value myself enough to demand the respect and understanding I deserved, regardless of whether others were ready to give it. The woman who had been seated at table 12 with the disappointments had revealed herself to be someone whose contributions were transforming lives and strengthening communities in ways that truly mattered. And that revelation had changed not just how others saw me, but how I saw myself and what I was willing to accept in my relationships with the people I loved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.